nadridadim, tirana, nadridadim, tirana, nadridadim, tirana, tanatirana, 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 nadridadim, tirana, nadirdirani, tumdirdirani, tum terikira takadridridani, takita tum tadingina tum, nadirdirdani, tumdirdirdani, tum terikira takadridridani, takita tum tadingina tum, tum dridridani, takita tum, takatum tatum, takita dekam, takita dekam, takita takita dekam, tum dridridani, takita tum, takatum tatum, takita dekam, takita dekam, takita dekam, nadredadim, tirana, tana tirana, nadredadim, tirana,
That was the sound of Roopa Mahadevan's gorgeous voice. Thank you for that, Roopa.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Amir ElSaffar, and tonight we're having a discussion with Roopa Mahadevan and George Ziadeh. And we'll be talking about different musical traditions, in particular the maqam, which is found in the Arab world as well as in Persian music and Turkish music and even parts of Southern European music and North African music as well, and all the way in parts of China. And raga, which is the musical language or the musical modes found throughout India. And there's Hindustani raga as well as Carnatic raga that are very, very closely related, but also have a lot of differences, which we'll get into in future conversations. Um, and this is part of a larger project called Raga Maqam. And it doesn't take much of a stretch to know what the name is referring to. And the concept of this is bringing musicians of the raga tradition and maqam tradition together. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of how the modes are constructed. Sometimes the notes in these modes are very similar, and sometimes they're extremely different. And historically, there's been some cross pollination and connection between these traditions, but they've really maintained their separate nature. There's something very qualitative and different that occurs when you are listening to raga music as opposed to maqam. One of which you might be hearing right now, which is the sruti or the drone that is coming from Rupa's side right now. That would be indicative of raga music. And there's other differences we're going to get into. But before we start getting into the theoretical stuff, I just want to introduce our two wonderful musicians here. And I should also mention that Raga Maqam, this project has been active since 2017. We've had a few performances, we've done some workshops, and we will be premiering a new work with a large group of something around 14 musicians sometime early next year, whenever our pandemic is behind us. Um, and I just yeah, and I want to thank the India Center Foundation who's been sponsoring this great collaboration. So actually, so you've gotten to hear a little bit of Rupa, but I actually want to turn to George and introduce our audience to George. Maybe you can, if you want to play something, and tell us a little bit about your, yeah, maybe play us something. I'd love to hear what you.
Hello, my name is George Ziadeh. I'm a player from Palestine. I live in New York. I've been living in New York for the past 30 years, and I'm happy to be part of tonight's performance and discuss about Indian Raga and Maqam traditions and how they interact with each other and how close and how far, like Amir said, could they stand sometimes. Uh, I played something close to what Rupa started with in terms of intervals. Phrasing is different, of course, and ornamentation is different,
Mm-hmm.
but the intervals were uh, close or maybe the same in some cases. Um yes, so good job.
So, like, for this maqam you played was maqam Kurd,
Nah, yeah.
and maybe just you can show kind of the as a scale, so to speak, or like just the basic notes that you.
Yeah, the tonic of the maqam is G.
Right.
Uh, the second note is A flat. This relation, and then you have B flat, A flat, G, and then you have uh, C. So basically, from C to G, you
Mm-hmm.
can create that color of sound. Ah, and it's a kind of similar tetrachord
Mm-hmm.
to what Rupa sung and also resolved to at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Also a lot of modulations in and ornamentation that borrowed from different scales.
Yeah. And then what about the rest of it, just so we can finish that? So you got your G, A flat, B flat, C. I'm tuned a little bit differently, but it's close enough. And then
E, E flat, F, G,
Uh-huh.
D, F, E flat, D, C, B flat, A flat, G.
Yeah, exactly. And so you kind of have the same intervals repeating at the fifth, like the G, A flat, B flat, C, and then starting at D, the same kind of relationship. And then maybe we'll get into how you because the interesting thing then is that the modulations that would take place to get out of like to create variation would be very different. So Rupa, how maybe you would have defined what you're saying totally differently. So this is where it's interesting.
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. I was actually following along the scale. Na, na, la, sa, ni, da, pa, ma, ga, ri, sa. It's funny when we go up the scale, we tend to ni, sa, ga, ma, pa. We start from that seventh,
Hmm.
the lower octave. Na, 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 ni, sa, ga, ma, pa. We kind of skip the second.
Hmm.
But in fact, this is Sindhu Bhairavi is the name of the raga. And interestingly enough, in the Carnatic tradition, it's not considered kind of a raga you would spend a lot of time on in a concert, like improvising around, or it's not a raga we're used to going deep in
Hmm.
the Carnatic tradition, and then which is different from I think the way it's treated in the Hindustani North Indian tradition. And like when you're learning this raga, you're almost I remember growing up, it was like, oh yeah, that raga has all the notes. It's
Right.
like you can fall any way you fall, you'll land in a place that's acceptable, you know?
Hmm.
Because ni sa ga ma pa da pa pa da, we even have that.
Hmm.
Na, 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 da, da. We have that sixth too. So there's kind of the scale as George drew it, and then there's all kinds of directions like branches to that tree, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's actually very freeing, but so emotional and soulful also.
Yeah.
So the composition I sang is called a tilana, which is that's a musical form that really is more about the rhythm,
Yeah.
because I was just singing syllables that nadre dadim tirana. These don't have meaning. They don't belong to any spoken language. Really, it's purely musical language, a rhythm language.
So it's it's a rhythm language. It's not the tonal language. It's not like the solfege or the
No, it's not.
interesting.
And it's actually used by dancers. So this song I did would be accompanied
Yeah.
commonly by a dancer doing, responding to the different rhythmic patterns within the song.
But it's the same mode that you were just describing.
Yeah,
What's the name of it again?
Sindhu Bhairavi, Sindhu
Simple Bhairav.
in the Hindustani tradition, Bhairav,
Yeah.
yeah.
Bhairav means what in general? Is it like a certain kind of note
That's a
pattern?
good
Or
question.
I hear it all the time, like different
I
ragas.
know there are different there are types different. Even in Karnataka, we have Ananda Bhairavi, Chalaka Bhairavi.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that there's actually as much of an etymology in the naming of the ragas as you might think. Uh,
Yeah. Just
Sometimes there's a clear gender in the name of the raga. I think sometimes it's very clearly a kind of inspired by a particular Hindu god or. Uh,
mm,
and I know in Hindustani tradition, there's a lot of association of raga with the time of the day.
yeah.
But in Carnatic, we're a little less stringent on that. It's become somewhat of a modern form, in that you're mostly going to concerts in the evenings, um,
Right.
and the goal is almost to give you a range of ragas, to kind of take you through a dynamic journey. So you'll hear a lot of ups and downs in terms of the pace. Like
Mm-hmm.
there'll be a very fast song followed by a very slow song.
Sure.
There'll be a 5-minute song followed by a 45-minute improvisation and composition. So
Yeah. Just keeping variation and different types of songs for the sake of the listeners, not being bored or getting monotonous. Or
yeah, yeah,
it would never be boring because the even in one small song, I think you can come up with infinite variations.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then so that's I guess one thing, like speaking of like modulation and stuff, my observation from the time I've spent working with you and with other raga musicians, um, is that oftentimes the raga might have built into it certain like what you said, you could go to the natural six or the flat six. there's other ragas that were that like Jay, the Bansuri player, has shown us, Jay Gandhi, where it's almost like you said, all the notes are there. It's this, but you wouldn't play. There's a certain way that you would get to those notes that
Correct.
would be logical based on where you started. But in the middle of the performance, you wouldn't exit that raga or transition into another raga and come back per se.
Correct.
You would
No.
you would so it would have to be kind of built into the structure of that raga to begin with.
Yeah, and I think what is the goal? And George, I'd love to hear your
Yeah,
kind of thoughts on this. But in a way, the duty of the raga musician, I think, and what you spend your all those years training and immersing yourself in, is to really deliver that raga to the audience.
Yeah.
It's to deliver, to kind of harness what's been done, in the years prior, how that raga has been kind of nurtured over time, and you're actually like inheriting that and then kind of passing it on to the listener. So in that way, it is about your own creativity and the newness, freshness you bring, the individuality you bring to the raga, but it still has to be that raga. It has to be that raga.
Yeah.
There's an integrity that's expected of you when you're delivering that. That's, in fact, that's how sacred that concept is.
Yeah.
I understand from you that the form itself is very yeah, it doesn't change. That within the form you will improvise, you have room to improvise, but the actual form has to be done in the same fashion every time.
Well,
Yeah,
let's start. What do we mean by form?
The form of the composition, I mean, the
Oh,
form.
if it's like the first thing, like what you're saying,
Yeah,
yeah. But if it was an improvisation, you would be fairly free to. But there might be expected transitions or expected phrases that are known to occur. I don't know.
right.
my
Yeah.
other question is there like a vocabulary that people use, like in jazz and Middle Eastern music, there's phrases that's coming and you learn it from like Miles Davis or Charlie Parker. People transcribe and learn solos.
Right.
Then they use them with their own flavor. Like they add their
Yeah.
own touch to it. So I understand usually that most most improvised solos, maybe 60% solid, like copied, and then 40% is maybe like the person himself have his new input. Like, but is it the same way in Indian music? Like, do you memorize other performers or like recordings from other previous performers from the other century, the 20th century or like early 20th century recordings? Do you memorize that stuff and try to incorporate it with your performance in your performance today?
Yeah, I mean, it's an oral tradition, an oral learning tradition in that sense. When you improvise, you're not looking at a sheet.
Of course.
In fact, there is no way that's been standardized in our tradition to even draw or describe these shapes that we're creating. How much do you shake between two notes? What is the how what's the circle look like of the overtone? These are things that you sometimes not even, I couldn't even say they're really taught in a cognitive way. It's more like you just listen and absorb, right? It's
Right.
osmosis, like you said, of listening to the masters, and you kind of it's actually shapes your instinct. If you've heard, Shankarabharanam is what we call the major scale, or Bilaval in the North Indian tradition. You hear hundreds of Shankarabharanams and you learn compositions. That's really, at least in the Carnatic tradition, that's kind of a strength, which is that we really hold sacred these nuggets, these compositions that are handed down to us with lyrics and form. And through the form, you go, oh, that is such a cool shape. And then you start to see, oh, that shape is repeated again in this other piece, but done maybe a little bit faster, or
Yeah.
wow, this is how they dealt with that higher octave, or so you kind of start to get a sense of the personality, of the feel of the raga. And that's the study, right? That's kind of the immersion part of it. Um, but rarely any guru will tell you, memorize. I mean, they could, I guess. You could memorize a few phrases, and you end up doing that just because you've heard it so much.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like from
Yeah.
hearing the performances while you're learning, you probably inherit phrases that other people do, right?
Yes. Yes. There are some phrases everyone knows. they do those phrases, you know.
Actually, I raised this because I think I thought it's a similarity between the tradition of maqam
Mm,
and also jazz. In jazz music, I feel it's very similar in terms of the vocabulary that you build up, you learn, and then you use in your solos when you improvise
Yeah.
together along the way. Like from listening, from playing, from whole text kind of pages. Like phrases and then people recall them
yeah.
And
essentially.
I think it really comes through an immersion. Like it's not like I mean, in the Western model of pedagogy, you go to a conservatory and you have 1 hour lesson every week or whatever, and then you have this, and that kind of structure, it works well for the kind of music that it's meant to propagate, like or to like written music kind of works well that way. But with oral traditions, so much of it is about just the time you spend in the environment, the listening, and I mean it's true of every tradition, but there's something like the pedagogy. Like I'm curious, Rupa, like how did you train with your guru, or your gurus? I'm sure you've had several. Like, what did your lessons look like? How were they structured? Were they formalized, or was it more um,
Yeah,
times?
so and I think, kind of the 20th century, part of the kind of Carnatic music project, so to speak, for better or worse, was like formalizing some of the art form a bit. And, you know, scholars will tell you that some of it was in response to the British, colonialism and needing to present a form that was legible in the eyes of the colonizer, which is to say, oh, we have all these exercises our students must learn, and it's very codified and organized, and look at this the way. So you do there are written notations. I mean, not notation in the sense of Western notation with
Step.
symbols and lines and things like this, but um we transliterate. So like sari gama padani sani da pa ma ga ri sa, the scale up and down we write as SRGMPDNS. So when I was learning, I would literally read different patterns with those letters. So SMGRSRGMRPMGR, this
Yeah.
kind of a thing is how it would be written.
Was
And
that something recent, like after the colonial era, or was that something that existed prior?
I don't want to speak without the
Okay.
my what I've heard is that generally, so I don't know to answer your question, but what I've heard is that was generally a 20th century project
If you
of writing things down and creating a formal, they say that Purandaradasa, who was actually in the 16th century, kind of created these exercises for learning.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of things that you do to kind of develop voice culture, right? So these patterns of jumping notes, learning how to sing fast but
Hmm.
with the clarity, learning how to open up your mouth, open up your voice in the upper and lower octaves, learning to sing many scales with precision, right? Because we have so many ragas.
Hmm.
So there is voice culture. Once you kind of, once the teacher thinks that you have enough facility because you've gone through those exercises, then you start to learn songs. But
Hmm.
song happens much later, actually.
Hmm.
First, it's these exercises to train the ear. It's partly ear training and voice training.
Sure. At the same time.
Because you have to be ready then to be able to just reproduce a complicated line, right? No one's going to
yeah
write that for you.
Hmm.
So Purandaradasa is supposedly the one who kind of came up with a system of learning, but I think it was really in the 20th century that you started to see books being published.
Hmm.
So now you can go and buy a book online. There are many things that intro to Carnatic music and just sing those exercises, and
Right.
uh,
And similarly, George, in Arabic music, like the advent of the conservatories in like the 1920s and 30s, that like brought to, like in Cairo and Baghdad and in Damascus and the Sham, Jerusalem, I think as well, like having these conservatories to to sort of formalize the training that otherwise happened in coffee houses or happened in performance venues.
very yeah yeah
And I
uh,
think
I feel like there's in our tradition, in the maqam tradition, there's an interruption
Mm.
that happened at the beginning of the 20th century with what you said, the conservatoire and the Western type pedagogy or approach to pedagogy,
Mm.
and introducing that into maqam music and trying to train maqam musicians in this fashion to learn maqam. I think it created a lot of problems, and we kind of lost, and it went into a different direction. People started to play more major scales as they are in equal temperament intonation and like equal.
Mm.
So the tuning of the intervals changed a lot, and also the composition styles. A lot of composition forms came started to be adopted from Western traditions. So in a way, even maybe without being conscious, the 20th century music in the Arab world is kind of like a reaction, or like it's so much influenced by colonized cultures, like colonial music. And it's something you can't help with. I mean, you hear something you like, and it's gonna be stay with you for the rest of your life. And I do really love a lot of Western classical music that I really appreciate a lot. Um, and also today we live in a world where there is no you hear everything. I mean, there's
Mhm.
no way you can isolate your ear and keep it just pure Indian. Hear everything.
Yeah, but there was a way it seemed like was it Tamburi Jamil Bey who also played cello?
Play cello and
He played
also,
Western music, but it didn't necessarily. I mean, was able to kind of keep them in separate ways. Like he would, maybe there was some influence of the technique.
yeah, I think that was the technique, and also the arpeggiation of using arpeggiation and
Mm.
that stuff. It's not really in from my experience and from my research on the tradition of maqam repertoire in in the Aleppo repertoire and the Egyptian Cairo repertoire, and my small knowledge of the Iraqi maqam repertoire. I feel that uh, there was some kind of harm that happened to the tradition in the
Mm.
20th century. And because of, I mean, but it's something inevitable. I feel like it's something you couldn't prevent. Life has changed. There is modernity. There is
Yeah.
recordings. There is everything. So,
Yeah,
but luckily in Iraqi maqam, I feel it stayed the same. I didn't.
kind of. Yeah, there's something.
It's one of
Um,
the places where it didn't change much. So.
yeah, well, because colonization happened very late in Iraq, or colonization from Europe, or basically the British colonial era didn't start until like around 1920, as opposed, and so previously it was only Ottoman and Persian civilizations that were occupying Iraq, so they're very much connected, and the musically were similar, and yes, there's definitely the results of Persian music and Turkish music, but it's it's part of the same musical language. It's still maqam. It's not a totally different method. Since we talked about major scales, um, maybe we'll just do another. I keep having to mute my mic because there's a totally other musical tradition like merengue coming through, so I'm muting it every time I'm not speaking. So I'm gonna mute, but I would love to hear maybe like this major mode. What's the ragam called? The rupa that you mentioned right before
Oh,
we.
I love you said ragam. Oh, that is so great. Because that's a very South Indian way of saying raga. Okay. Ragam, ragam. Okay. It's called Shankara Bharanam is the name of the it's very long. Sankara. Shankara Bharanam. Bharanam.
Shankara
Yeah.
Bharanam. So maybe you could start with a phrase, and then George could respond either singing or oud or however you feeling.
Okay. Let me just turn on the tambura here. It didn't quite work in the opening. But let's see if it works now. Oh, good. Is it too loud or tambura's okay?
I love the sound, but it means that when George plays, I'm losing him. So maybe when you're not,
I'll lower it when I'm not singing or something.
yeah, so that the oud doesn't get lost. Sorry, George, what? I can't hear George now.
I can play the drone for heritage.
Yeah, but it's yeah.
I'll keep it low on my end. Even
Oh,
when I'm singing, I'll keep it low.
okay.
I'll just kind of sing the swaras, the syllables, maybe. Gama pa pa ma pa da ma ga ma gama pa da ni da pa ma pa da ni ni da pa da ma ga ma. Isari gama gama pa pa ma pa da ma ga ma ga ma pa da 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 pa ma ga ma pa da ni da pa ma ga ma ga ma pa da pa ma ga ma pa da ni da pa ma ga ma ni da ga da pa ri pa ma ga ri ma ga ga ri ri sa ah ah ri ah na Oh.
Mm, gorgeous. Allah, Allah. Afia, beautiful. This is interesting. Because I heard, like George, you were kind of going between like an old, like the very first phrases you were playing were like Turkish Rust, where we would say like Ottoman era Rust, which is where the third degree is like kind of a lowered third. It's not a major third. It's not a minor. But it's close, very getting close to the major third. It's almost like a what we call a just intonation. I don't want to get into the math of it, but it's basically in the overtone series. It's like this one of these very consonant basic ratios, 5 to 4 ratio for any. Um, and I really heard like Rupa's note. I was listening. I was also wondering how I would interpret because it's sort of between two maqams for us. It's between this rust, this like older style of rust, which has this higher third. And what I mean is which is now, and then a newer would be which is totally not that.
Ah.
So there's like three different, or four. There's actually a lot of different intonations for that, but like it's interesting 'cause, like George's taqasim were kind of blending those two or blurring the boundaries. I don't know if you would interpret what you played the same way, George.
Definitely, I use a little major scale, but not with major intonations. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not using equal temperament. So like you said, the third is better than major. It has a different flavor. It has a very different flavor. Uh, it, it,
Ah,
it's
A bit hard to hear, George.
hard to hear me, said, huh?
Yeah, that's
that's
better.
great. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes we're in this streaming platform. Weird things enter the stream.
Was saying that the third in the Ajam Maqam or in the like you said the old Rust is a slightly lower third, and I feel it's also similar to what Rupa was singing. I mean, in terms of the placement of that.
Yeah. I would also say that the phrase, like, if you wanted to say this is like the major scale, like, first of all, the phrasing that Rupa is singing and the phrasing that you're playing are very different. Like, the actual melodies themselves, like, I'm sure you could convincingly make, if you ornamented, like, if Rupa, you ornamented what George sang, you could sort of sneak it in and convincingly and vice versa. Because, there's musical languages that are different. And then there's ornamentation, which is part of the language, but it's more the inflection. It's more like the accent, and that's where like if I could hear an oud player and recognize if they were coming from Syrian tradition or Palestinian or Iraqi or based on little ornaments. And I'm sure in Carnatic music you could tell someone from maybe from Bangalore is a little different from Chennai, and then
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
Hindustani obviously the ornamentation is totally different.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, and then there's the phrases themselves, and the phrases themselves are really different. Um, and so yeah, you could sort of categorize them as being, yeah, it's like major, it's the major, but it's not very little to do with major scale as it's presented in Western music. So that's where you see the limits of trying to like define it according to, and you could say either from the colonizers language, or just in general, just to say Western language way of describing things, which has sort of become hegemonic. Okay, there's these, and it's like, no, actually,
Yeah.
there's so much subtlety that's buried, not buried. It's the surface. It's the goods, and that's the beautiful part of it. So, and I don't think it's been lost at all, even after what George was saying. We're still. Um,
I almost felt it like a heat map, like I felt like when we were in the kind of this region. Sa-re-ga-ma-ga. Even from me, when I'm singing this raga and I'm in that zone, like on the holding the third, and all those beautiful overtones that between the second, third, and fourth. And kind of going into the ni, I feel like that is a very warm, heavy. That's how I kind of associate it. Like if I were to translate it into the world of color or heat. And then I felt both of us when we went into the gamapadani, that zone, it brightened.
Yeah.
It became less heavy and it kind of had a spring to it. I thought I heard that also when you're playing, kind of. Yeah, kind of as we went up to the higher saw, Na 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 na
Uh,
yeah.
Iraqi tradition also, Amir, you play the Ajam Maqam. Are you there, Amir?
yeah,
Uh, it also has different introduction, and it has special way of introducing it, right? You can play like Tahrir of Ajam and something. The Tahrir.
like the tahrir of Ajam would be like. أريد من جن جان جان أمير
Oh,
it's not major, but it's I think it's a little higher in terms of the intervals, but
yeah, yeah,
I do
yeah, yeah.
it works.
Hmm. No, yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys have punctuation? Sometimes I feel in ragas when we elaborate, there's almost like sometimes a period or a semicolon or a comma.
Mm.
Um, because you were talking about inflection as being, in a way, it's more than ornamentation, it's the inflection that defines,
Yeah.
so like even, we end a phrase with a period, like na na sanini. So the way they hit that sa actually has a little bit of the seventh in it.
Mm.
Sani,
Yeah,
yeah.
like a little.
Ra, 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 na. And that's very specific to this raga. For example, there's another raga, Kalyani, just same scale but the augmented fourth. Sa ri ga ma pa da ni sa ni da pa ma ga ri sa. Essentially, if we're talking scale, which we've already decided is silly, but that's the only difference really in terms of the notes. But you would never do this na 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 gari sani, even though gari sani is same in both ragas. Na
Right.
na 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 na. It's such a classic Shankara Bharanam.
Yeah,
phrase, you
yeah.
know.
Like even though the notes are the same, there's some little like certain. This is like the qafla, I think,
Huh.
which is the word in Arabic to describe this, which is like the ending of the phrase, the little cadences, and there's
Huh.
big qaflat and there's small like miniature ones, and George is the master of these,
Huh.
but you can
Can
really
we hear a few of those?
يا ليلي يا ليلي يا ليلي يا ليلي يا ليلي يا ليلي But what she was saying about those the like endings and I think it's more related to what you say. If it's language, then it makes sense if you interrupting a word somewhere at the end or like emphasizing the end. And we have it in Arabic singing a little bit borrowed from the Tajweed tradition, which is the Quranic.
George just bring the mic a little closer so we can get because this is such good information. We want to make sure.
Was saying about that particular move or like punctuation that Rupa mentioned in the Indian tradition.
Mm.
I'm not sure if it's related to the word itself. If, you know, there is words, right? Was it a word, part of a word?
Not because this is during the improv when we use like ta na ri you know. But definitely you hear that punctuation even in the composition, surely. But it's almost like you want to bring that into your improvisation, as if you were having a conversation. You're like, I'm saying this now, I'm saying that now, I'm saying this and that. You know, it actually feels like almost like a sermon,
Ah,
you know, edicts that you're kind of laying down as you develop the raga. And yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And no one teaches it to you with that concept, but you hear it. Um,
Arabic singing or dealing with the Arab language when you sing, we tend to lean more on toward the Quranic recitation
ah,
because they have very clear understanding of vocal production, letter production, what part of the mouth it comes from, how how you would sustain a letter,
hmm,
how long it is sustained. It's all like well studied tradition. Unfortunately, it's not as involved in the music of today, but most musicians and great musicians who were in the early 20th century and left the early recordings of Arabic music had this training.
hmm,
You would hear the qafla, you would hear those things very particular and
yeah,
it's less nowadays, but it's all related to diction. You know,
hmm,
how would you pronounce, how much you would sustain a letter. Uh, we have in Arabic some letters are moving letters, and we call
hmm,
stationary letters. They end, they die. You know, like we say the letter, and it just finishes there. And there is letters that has an extension to it, like it takes you to another town, and so it
hmm.
is similar, but I like the way you do the punctuation. It's like really it, it involves the audience also.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
Yeah, but can you show like on the oud like because it also is part of the I think it's still in a way related to tajweed and to the Arabic, even the poetry and the rhythms, but you know like those fast those like kind of snappy qaflas those that I noticed also like it's one difference from early recordings, like like if you listen to Sami Showa, the great violinist, uh, like there was an early style where they would play these very short phrases at the beginning of the this improvisation, sort of with a lot of quiet, which I wonder if it's related to the word taqsim, which is qasim, like to break up. But anyway, it's another. Which is taqsim is the word for instrumental improvisation.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, just make sure. Yeah, come closer because it really makes a big difference when you're like even like few inches. Yeah. Um, Somebody asked George. I'm looking at the sidebar. We have one question from an audience member, saying, "How traditional were you being with the major scale maqam just now? Did you adapt your playing to fit with Rupa's style?" I mean, maybe we kind of uh, addressed it, but
I'm like it's maqam is a living thing and are living. So something you react to it right away without thinking if I'm doing a traditional thing or non-traditional. But in general, I was traditional. I mean, I was playing my voice in this maqam the way I understand it and the way I feel it. I expressed it in that fashion, and I think it's not so far from the Indian expression of that those like intervals.
yeah, I often feel like we're this we're at our strongest when we play in the language that you've trained, you've played 40 years, you've been playing the oud and absorbing this musical language. If just suddenly you hear something that's different and then you try to adapt to what you think, like how you're interpreting, oh, this phrase sounded like that, you suddenly you get knocked off balance a little bit, and I feel like the best posture is to stay like rooted where you are, but also you're malleable. It's almost like like a tree that's got its roots, but then it can also sway with the wind. So when Rupa sings a particular phrase, it leads you somewhere, but you don't lose your foundation. And of course, there's a whole dichotomy. What is tradition? What is contemporary? What is this is another question that I think because we're always contemporary because as long as we're living and breathing and playing music, um, but we have our roots in something. So being able to stay rooted and 'cause that's the way I felt like I heard you constantly adapting, but you didn't go outside of your own. I mean, you're still George, and your voice is your oud playing sound is yours, and so yeah.
Understand one fact that we are who we are. We are what we are. An accumulation of uh, memory of sound and phrases and poems of music. But at the end, it's impossible to become somebody else. Like, it's impossible for me to become an Indian to perform Indian music, totally Indian music. I can interact with Indian music, but it'll be like it's better to hear it from the people who does it. Who grew up saying it and really strong and present in their character in the language. So for me, I feel like it's unnecessary to change styles or like to learn a new style. Or communicate with a new style. It's good to learn it, understand it, but performing it, you leave it to the expert or to the person who's been spending their life doing it. So I think it sounds best always when it comes from the original people who who are born in the tradition and they're not like passing through it or like going through. I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't learn other traditions. I'm saying Indian music sounds a lot so good from Indian people and Arabic music sounds great. But yeah, the classical music sounds very good in Germany,
Yeah.
in, in many other countries in Europe, but doesn't sound the same in the Middle East when Middle Eastern people play classical Western music. It always sounds different.
Mm.
It's interesting. I think I was just thinking today about like I'd love to learn, George and Amir, how you conceive of practice and growth as a musician, given what you just said, because there's so many ragas in the Indian classical system. To master all of those and feel completely present when you're singing them, many lifetimes, and all the elders will always say that, right? It's an ocean. You can never be a master. But I think even today I was talking to a friend and I was saying, I'm going to choose like 3 ragas this year and that's it. And go deep and become intimate, with that raga. And I think, like, in a way, once you go deep, the further you plunge down, right? And in a way you start to unclench, and then you're open, because you've already expanded within yourself. We're becoming more one with the form. Then it's actually, I think, more meaningful when you then take in other sounds, other approaches. You're actually able to be more spongy and porous. I feel sometimes when any of us doesn't feel rooted in something, whether it's some craft or our traditions, then it's actually, there's a resistance to then like trying to find intersection or trying to learn from another tradition, because you yourself are not, you're on shaky ground. um and Amir's at, we're all in the space of doing crossover and all these things, and so I'm saying it with that spirit in mind, which is that, like, I think we want to, in the spirit of like kind of being more community, thinking more broadly about who our community is and expanding that beyond our silos of I'm from this country and this tradition. At the same time, I think I'm learning more and more, the deeper I go in one, I'm actually unclenching a lot more, and
Yeah.
then able to, like, I was able to kind of sing and hear George at the same time. I was finding that I was able to hear what he was doing to my raga, in a way that if I was so nervous about, am I getting the notes right, am I singing it right, am I really part of this tradition, if you start, then you're not even listening, you're just in your head.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like, what's the journey of a, I don't we have much time, but what's the journey of a, like, Iraqi maqam musician in that sense, like, how do you grow with these ragas, is there a goal, or is it more individual, or
Wait,
is it
you asked
repertoire?
about Iraqi maqam connecting with raga?
Yeah, just like growth, like the musician's journey, is it
He was saying that in Indian music there's a lot of ragas and there's a lot of composition that you want to perfect and learn. It takes not only one life; you need a couple of lives to.
yeah.
So she's saying, at what point do you feel like you have enough of that tradition, learning that tradition?
Yeah, it's never. I mean, there's always more you could discover, and like, so there's certain maqamat that I feel comfortable performing, and I've performed many times and recorded, and there's others that are in the repertoire, but they're more in the background because maybe I learned them 15 years ago, but I haven't really been performing them actively since then. So if you ask me to, I could do it, but I wouldn't be as much at home. So yeah, then I want to go and go deeper into those to fully, and then if I listen to some recordings of, like, you know some of the masters from the 1920s and 30s, I say, oh God, I don't know anything. Even the ones that I thought I knew well, there's so many layers of detail, and you look at somebody like this great singer Yusuf Omar, who uh, was his dates are like 1918 to 1989, or 1987. I mean, his whole life he was still like, he never stopped learning and absorbing. He'd even invite like a singer from the countryside to come live with him in Baghdad for like 6 months. He said, "Stay in my house. I just want," and he kind of like absorbed everything he possibly could. And he was already like an unparalleled master, but there's more, and it's not like a greedy kind of like you need more. It's not that at all. It's like this. It's this emptiness that you allow to, you like, and it's like allowing this music to inhabit you in a way, and it's a sort of a pious way of being. um, but it's tricky when you've got, like, in my case, and maybe each of you, like when you're in different musical worlds, then there's an interesting thing that happens where actually the interaction between opposing forces creates something new,
Yeah.
and that couldn't have happened if you were just into this or just into that. So, and that's, where we live today, living in New York in the 21st century, and is it a corrupting influence or is it opening up new possibilities? And there's different ways to see it, and it really depends on the individual and how they work with it. So, um,
Yes, I
oh, sorry.
feel that you can't stop learning, but there's not enough time to learn everything. So, like in our tradition, in Aleppo, we have maybe more than 700 muwashshahs. I probably memorized maybe like 50, 60 of them
Hmm.
from different suites, that are in use, that are common, that are still alive, people use. So I memorize these, but every opportunity and chance I get to learn something that I don't know, like a new muwashah, a new composition, an old composition that I know, and I have the time to do it. It's a great thing to learn, and I feel like it's part of the creation process is learning. You have to learn in order to. I mean, if
Yeah,
you stop learning, then you kind of like on hold when you're creating because you I feel like in my experience, if I don't memorize like a measure every day or a new information, I feel like I didn't live today. Like it reminds me of. So I like myself. I like to at least spend, half an hour a day to learn a phrase or like something that I
Wow.
heard that particularly took my attention, but I don't know it. So I'm gonna spend some time learning it or a muwashah or now, even with the Iraqi maqam, also there's so much to learn, and every time when you have time, you want to learn these things.
yeah.
Endless process.
And it's yeah, but we only have finite amount of time, and that's part of the beauty too. And speaking of which, it's 9 o'clock. I think that we were doing a 1 hour session, but I'd love to end with some music. George, you mentioned the mwashah, which is kind of a song form. Maybe you could perform one for us, and then Rupa, if you feel inspired to respond, um, be nice.
يمر عجبا يا لا 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 يا لا لا عجوبا ويمضي أمان على أسير الغرام يا لا 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 يا لا لا أليس هذا يا لا 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 يا لا لا عجيب أمان أمان أليس هذا حرام يا لا 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 يا لا لا
Thank you both. Gorgeous. Yeah. What was this the same? This was a different raga, right? Ragam.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's just this one you ended with?
It's like a darbari kind of sari paga mari sani sani. Yeah, it's like darbari or Kannada, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Has a different intonation. than the other one.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, beautiful. It was great hanging out with both of you. All of you at home watching, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was definitely illuminating for me, and I feel like it's. Wish we could all be just hanging out together, but it's
I
nice
know.
the way that we can at least share in this situation. At least we can share with each other and share with everyone else. So hopefully we'll be playing music together very soon.
Yeah, I would love to play with you more, George. That was so inspiring. Thank you. And
Both of you.
Amir too. Thank you so much. Great questions and a lot of nuggets for me.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot that we could explore. Each little nugget is another
Yeah.
whole conversation. So, um,
The India, Center Foundation for
yeah,
India
yeah,
is a great, great platform to be part of, and it's a really interesting and lovely experience to interact with the close traditions to us, and geographically and
musically, yeah. Yeah, thank you to the India Center Foundation, and of course Broken Raga Massive for keeping this series going despite our quarantining and all that. And hopefully we'll be yeah playing live soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Can't wait.
Yeah, me neither. All right, love to everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night.